now I would like to introduce our second guest speaker, for guest keynote speaker for today, Dr. Emma Leslie. Emma Leslie is an Australian Cambodian and has lived and worked in Cambodia for the last 25 years. Emma is the founder and director of the Centre for Peace and Conflict Studies, supporting peace processes and conflict transformation in Asia. She launched the Cambodian Peace Museum and for a decade has served as a member of the International Contact Group to assist the peace talks between the Philippine government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. Emma has been actively engaged in Myanmar for 25 years and has made several peace missions to North Korea and has accompanied many non-state actors in their negotiations and assisted them with their strategies. Emma teaches mediation, my apologies, to United Nations personnel annually at the Swedish government's Folke Bernadotté Academy. Emma is an active steering committee member of both the Southeast Asia Women Mediators and Peace Negotiators, as well as the Women Mediators across the Commonwealth Network. Emma serves on the board of the Peace Building Initiative at the University of Melbourne and the International Advisory Board of National University of East Timor Peace Centre. She holds a BA in Southeast Asia History and Politics, a graduate diploma in education, an MA in International Development, an honorary PhD in education, and if that's not enough, she also holds the title of Order of Australia. Emma was one of 1,000 women nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2005, and she was profiled by CACID as a hero of dialogue. Now, CACID is the only intergovernmental organisation that's governed by religious representatives and dedicated to the facilitation of dialogue between different cultures and faiths. Its unique mandate allows it to bridge the gap between religious leaders and policymakers in order to advocate peace and combat violent extremism. Emma recently founded Dialogue Australia and began a soon-to-be-released podcast, Peace Builder Who Packs a Punch. The title of Emma's presentation here today is Imagine Peace. And this is, of course, fits nicely with the 2022-23 Rotary theme. Emma will be sharing how her organisation reimagined what was possible for peace and conflict transformation, insights into how her team is shaping the future of international peace building, and how these key lessons can help inform your own leadership role in Rotary. I believe we are truly honoured to have such an amazing person present to us here today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Emma Leslie.
David, thank you for such a warm welcome. And I have to say, the sun is just rising in Cambodia. I'm in a small village, but in our Cambodia Peace Gallery, and you can see behind me our peace tree. So I'm bringing you all of the positive energy and joyfulness of the morning time in Cambodia, and particularly from the village. If you listen very carefully, you might be able to hear there are Buddhist monks actually chanting somewhere nearby. I'm not exactly sure what the ceremony is, but hopefully you can get some Cambodian flavor today. And after such an introduction, I think there's nothing to be proud of, because the world that we're living in right now, obviously you're all thinking about Ukraine, but we've just been through the Afghanistan crisis in the last year. I've just spent an entire year focusing every day on Myanmar. And so it's all very well to have a lot of accolades and a lot of responsibility for peace, but it seems that we're not doing so well. So I'm very grateful to have this forum and this space to share some of the ways that we're thinking about how we can go forward, but equally coming with some sense of humility about the fact that we don't really still have all of the answers about how we build peace in the 21st century and how we take the kind of leadership that's required to turn that level of violence and conflict around. And I'm very happy to see that the connection from David's presentation, of course, is active listening, as you were all commenting as I came into the room. And of course, an absolute fundamental of the work that we do. So I might come back to that later. I also want to add, and I hope like many of you, that one of my most important identities right now is to be a grandma to my two Cambodian grandchildren. And so actually, if I had a choice, I would rather you just introduce me as rocking granny who knows what Lego is and knows where the water park is in Phnom Penh. So hopefully keeping grounded in that identity. I wanted to start off a little bit talking about values and vision. It's something that we learned the hard way, I think, some years back. Many of you know about NGOs around the world. Many of you support so many non-government organizations, non-profit organizations. And it took me some time as a leader or as a director of an NGO to understand that what mattered less in the work that we did was whether we had the best human resource management policy, whether we had the correct finance procedure, whether we were meeting the log frames and the targets that our donors were giving us, whether we were structured and had the right kind of staff meetings and so on. But what was more critical was to have very clear values and to be values driven and to hold a vision. And over time, I've come to understand that just five very simple agreed values has really held our team together. We have 3 teams across Cambodia that work all over Asia. We have some personnel in the US, in New Zealand, in different places. So how to hold a diverse group of passionate, committed, hardworking peace builders into one framework. And so a few years ago, we came up with values, and we came to understand that when people ask us, what do you do? What is your organization about? Where are you? None of these things mattered as much as saying what we stand for. And I want to share them with you now, partly because it's by way of saying this is the way that we exist in the world and the way that we approach the kind of violent conflicts that we see all around our region, but all around the world as well. So the first one is to be grounded. And for us, grounded has 2 dimensions to it. We stay grounded in the work that we do by making sure that we have a thorough analysis. And so you can imagine the very complexity of a situation like Myanmar. It has something like 17 armed groups. It has Aung San Suu Kyi's political party and a very large military of 500,000 people. It has some of the richest resources in the world. The hugest jade mine, $38 billion. It has $25 billion worth of gas annually. So it's a very complex system that flows into China and India and Thailand and Bangladesh. And so what is most critical for us is not just to lose sight of our analysis, but also to lose sight of the people. Why do we show up for this work? Why do we do these things? At the moment, it's very exciting to get involved in the politics of Cambodia is facilitating the process in Myanmar. The UN envoy has flown here and there. But above all, every day we remind ourselves that the work we do is to serve the people on the ground. It's to stay grounded in the reality that they face. And if their lives don't change, then we're not doing our job. So our first value is ongoing critical analysis grounded with the people. The second one is about excellence. And we often have to remind ourselves that excellence is not about perfection, that frankly speaking, none of us are perfect, but that striving for excellence challenges us to continue to improve our work. It's committing to outstanding work all of the time. And again, working in a nonprofit sector, sometimes it's easy to think, well, we're already good enough. We're volunteering, we're giving our lives, we're sacrificing. But actually, unless we commit to outstanding work, then it's really a sort of half-baked, half-ass effort. And I think something that we've really had to challenge ourselves about is, what is the difference between professionalism and excellence? We want to be professional peace builders. We want to be professional mediators. But what's more important is, are we really bringing our whole selves? Are we really giving people the state of the art in the field that we work within? The third value is trust. And I think this is fundamentally where active listening comes in. And we teach active listening in our master's degree, in our PhD program, in every single training program that we do. Because precisely as you were discussing before, the way to foster deep empathy, to really be connected with people, to have relationship, is to listen first. And it's far too easy with an introduction you gave me today to be the expert, to be the outsider, to be the white person that came in and have all the answers. But actually, for each and every one of us, regardless of ethnicity, nationality, identity, the humility of listening first is so powerful and transformative. And so we practice active listening, we practice humility, we practice empathy and solidarity, we value diversity, but all of those because the effect is a kind of honesty, a kind of generosity, and above all, a respect. The work that we do involves us sometimes having to sit with groups that most of us would find unsavory. Sometimes we find ourselves staying in a military camp and needing to listen to the soldiers there. Sometimes we've had to reach out to armed groups and revolutionaries and those that are often called terrorists in order to try and understand what drives them. If we don't listen carefully, we can make such big mistakes. We can get the story so far wrong. Prior to the fall of Kabul in Afghanistan, the European Union flew 50 women to Qatar to listen to what they wanted to say about the future of Afghanistan. It sounded like the perfect intervention. Brilliant, let's have 50 women come together and know what women think about Afghanistan. They put them in a nice hotel and they gave them 3 days to come out with one statement. In retrospect, of course, the European Union is eating humble pie as Kabul fell and we saw the impact on women all across Afghanistan. But in particular, realizing that the kind of tokenism of just flying in 50 women for 3 days, such diverse views from different parts of the country, different identities, different histories, different classes, and all of them expected to boil down their perspective into one paper in 3 days. That's not active listening. Active listening understands that there are different viewpoints, that sometimes the minority viewpoint is actually speaking truth, and that there are often multiple truths that we have to contend with. So trust is one of our values, but it's a Pandora's box of approaches and ways of thinking about how we build relationship. And above all, it's about suspending ego and being willing to say, we don't know, but we're willing to sit here and listen deeply to you. Our fourth value is continued learning. And again, that fosters humility, because frankly speaking, none of us have the answers to the way the world works now. And I think the challenges that we're seeing in Ukraine, the shifting in the world order, the different dynamics in our region, how do we as Australians show up into all of that context, means that we have a lot of learning to do. And so our daily practice is to critically reflect, to evaluate and to adapt our methods and our ways of working. And I want to speak to that a little bit more later. And the last value is courageousness. And for us, courageousness or courage is not about running into the line of fire. I was not the first person on the plane once the coup happened in Yangon. I was not the first person on the plane to Kabul, and I'm certainly not sitting in Ukraine today. Courageousness for us is not taking a risk, but it is questioning ourselves constantly. Are we innovative enough? Have we pushed beyond the usual boundaries? Have we explored all the options in mediation? Have we tried to find the creative other ways that peace could be built in this situation? We try to push ourselves to leadership, but the kind of leadership that's not controlling and telling people what to do, but sitting alongside of people and bringing them into a new possibility, to take initiative, to try something different. Frankly, much of what we've learned about peace and conflict resolution in the 20th century isn't working into the 21st century. And so we've had to have major rethink. It takes courage to let go of what we've always done. It takes a lot of shifting and personal reflection to let go of the way that we think things should work. And so in our organizational team, every day asking ourselves, have we really thought of the way forward here? Values are one part of what holds us together and drives us, but equally so is our vision. And I want to share that when I set out on this work 25 years ago, I started actually in the ecumenical movement with the National Council of Churches in Australia, came to Asia. I had the privilege to be in Myanmar back in 1995 and so many times since then, living in Cambodia and so on. But the vision we held all of those years was to end violent conflict in Asia. And it seemed so concrete and so doable. And 10 years ago, we realized that ending violent conflict was almost an impossible mission, that there is always conflict in our lives. It's part of our lives. It's the part of how we have relationship, is how we understand differences, diversity coming together. And that violent conflict was so manifest in the world system that we have, that we were almost setting ourselves up to fail. But more importantly, we realized that we were not being generative. We were trying to stop something. We were trying to block something. We were trying to put it back into the can of worms and close the lid on it. All of us would love to go back and see Afghanistan 50 years ago, 70 years ago, not enter into the spiral of violence it's in today. All of us are pleased that Cambodia is now stable, and yet we know under the surface there are still tensions bubbling. We would love to see Myanmar be a beautiful, diverse society where none of the violence that we've seen in the last year happened. But it happened, and it's in the past. But what we need to focus on is how we imagine the future. And of course, that's the title for today. Imagine peace. This is something now that drives us forward into the future. What does peace look like? What could you imagine out of this violence? On February 1, 2021, a terrible coup d'etat happened in Yangon, and Aung San Suu Kyi was arrested. The military came onto the streets. People across the country were arrested. Terrible torture, humiliation. Students being asked to crawl on their knees as dogs up and down the road and so on. You don't need more pictures because you see them every day on the news. You see them every time you turn on your television. We're seeing them now in Ukraine. But what we don't see enough of is peace. What does peace look like? How can we imagine it? Do we give young people an image of what's possible and what's doable? What is the meaning of the peace tree behind me? I'm sitting in the Cambodia Peace Gallery. And when we built this museum, so many people wanted us to put pictures of the suffering of the Khmer Rouge time, the genocide and the terrible civil war that happened in Cambodia afterwards. People wanted us to have pictures of the bombs that were dropped on Cambodia and all of those terrible images of children being affected and so on. But instead, our founders and our Cambodian visionaries said, no, we want to build a museum that inspires young people to a new future and a new possibility. We want them to imagine their peace. We want them to think creatively, what could Cambodia be? What kind of nationalism do we want? What kind of relationship do they want with each other? How do they want to move forward? So it's not so much what is often called healing the past, dealing with the past. It's about how to let go of the past, bringing some lessons learned, but cracking open the possibility for the future. I'm very fortunate to be married to a Cambodian man, hence being here so long, perhaps, other than my work. But he was a survivor of the Khmer Rouge time, a child soldier, and someone who later came to peace building work. And he said, for many years, he was happy to speak about that experience. But at a certain moment, he realized he didn't want to live the rest of his life through the lens of that violence. He chose to learn to play the saxophone on YouTube, of all things. And now when people ask him to speak about his experience, he says, I won't speak to the past, but I'll play the saxophone for you. It will give you some energy and some inspiration, and then you'll go forward. And so it's more powerful, in my view, when he plays Hallelujah on the saxophone, and we can see the transformation of a human who's looking to what kind of society he leaves his grandchildren. I first went intentionally to Myanmar in 1999. It was a time when the military again controlled the country. People told us there's nothing you can do there. It's impossible. There's no way you can work. So we had heard that there were 2 or 3 people that were quietly under the surface, using religious identity to protect themselves, that could really use some support. Just 3 people, different parts of the country. So we decided to go and visit them, not to isolate them further, to go be with them and to see what they were saying, to listen to their story. And it was amazing because those 3 people turned into 10 people. They were all working with somebody else and somebody else. And we took them to dinner and we listened carefully. We connected them to one another. And over the next 5 years, we really built a movement across Myanmar, which we didn't build actually. It already existed, but it just needed some trust and some safe spaces for people to be brought together. That movement today is part of the nonviolent revolution that's resisting the military in Myanmar today. And we hope that they can be successful in fighting a very deep military entrenched system. I say this because sometimes we think imagining peace, imagining Rotary, imagining a movement has to be something enormous. But for us, we came to understand that it just started with 3 people, 3 names, 3 telephone numbers, got to our hotel, we called them, we said a little bit about who we are, the phones are bugged at that time, and they agreed to have a cup of tea with us. And from there, hearing their story, realizing who they were, what kind of support we could offer them, it grew and it grew and it grew. Out of that experience in 2008, we realized that the sanctions that had been put on Myanmar were almost suffocating the people. They had no economy system, they had no way to live, they were cut off from the world, they were not allowed to communicate. And so we started a campaign in the world to end the sanctions and to open up Myanmar. And so by 2012, Myanmar became an open society. Many countries, including Australia, changed their policy. And it was possible again to engage. The military stood down, the first elections were held, things were possible again. That's imagining peace. What if we didn't hold this back, but actually crack this open? Of course, it doesn't solve everything, but having that possibility. It was the same experience when we realized in 2017 that North Korea was a country that was similar, that North Koreans surely had children and grandchildren that they loved. North Koreans were surely not all robots, as the media or the United States or China or others would like us to believe. I can honestly say that going to Pyongyang for the first time in 2017, accompanied by another civil society leader who had been before, was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. Classically, I think I've done this to my poor parents before, say goodbye to people, not sure what kind of communication we'll get when we're there. Is this Kim Jong-un going to take us all out? Are we going to be arrested? Da, 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 da. But still wanting to test our understanding of whether DPRK, the North Koreans, are really the people that we're told them to be. For sure, the system of North Korea is as bad as we understand it to be. But the people themselves are just like any of us anywhere in the world who would like to imagine peace, who would like to see a new possibility. Pyongyang is the most incredible, beautiful city. It was during the Korean War razed by bombing, and over the years they've managed to revive it and build it. Of course, some of that through forced labor, but some of it through a pride and a nationalism that says, we also want to stand on the world stage. We also want to be considered with dignity and humanity and respect. I've had now 5 trips to North Korea. I think less anxious than the first, but still sometimes with some anxiety. But really, I can say today that we have found incredible friends there. People who've now visited us back in Cambodia, people who've become part of our Asia Peace movement, people who are constantly thinking and looking at how could they advise their government? How can peace talks happen? How can we find a way forward? Of course, they hold on to nuclear weapons as a small country next to China with 30,000 US troops on their border. So they continue to hold to a security framework. But our hope and our dream and our imagining of peace would be that somehow we can shift that sense of security, that maybe we can stand down the troops in South Korea. Maybe China can offer some more security to North Korea. And sooner or later, we can all visit what is my favorite experience there, the Pyongyang Circus, a place where young people can do the most extraordinary circus performances, dance, singing, and so on and so forth. One of my friends in North Korea, Mr. O, he once told me, you know, Emma, I have the biggest headache. He said, my son loves computer games and I can never get him off the computer. I don't know how to stop him. And now he's fallen in love and he wants to arrange his own marriage. And I thought, well, which Asian father doesn't have these challenges? Computer games and recalcitrant children who want to make their own decisions about their lives and their loves. So part of our journey is to keep saying how in the midst of conflict, of violence, of narrative so strong, can we keep imagining peace? How can we listen to people deeply enough and with them ignite something possible and passionate and different in the world? I think the most courageous work we've done to date has been to say that the international system we have, the United Nations frameworks, the notion of big mediators, we call them big man mediators, not because they're men particularly, but because it's this idea that a man arrives on a white horse and saves the day. How do we move beyond that? So one of the things that we've started to explore is what we call being in the middle by being on the edge. And in some ways, I think as an Australian, I can relate to that more because having lived in Australia, we are kind of on the edge of the world. And yet so often Australian leadership in the international system has taken a real positive turn. One of the things we're always proud of in Cambodia is Gareth Evans and the time when Cambodia led in the peace process and brought a real solution and a way forward for Cambodians. So being in the middle by being on the edge is saying, we don't need somebody from the United Nations to fly out and put 2 parties together and bang their heads until we have a peace agreement. This is about saying that conflicts now are so complex, and in every country, every place, every community, there's something that we can do to contribute to that peace. in Myanmar, I'm pleased to say that in the last year, the Australian government has engaged us so much on how to be supportive. What can we do? How can we help people on the ground? How can we help at the political level? And so for me, that's a new creative way of us being international and in partnership with each other. We had great mediators in the 50s in the post-World War II era, but the notion of a big man mediator coming in no longer stands. We're looking at feminist models of peace building. What does that mean? That's not about women, surprisingly. It is about sharing power. It is about, as we understand feminism, feminism is about giving away power, because we believe the more power we give away, the more power there is. Power is not finite. Power is not something that ends. We need to be able to be expansive about the kind of world we live in, generous, hospitable, open our doors, share our resources, be together with one another, because giving away power, being collaborative, not having ego, is actually part of what unlocks the conflict dynamic, is saying you're not excluded, you're included. Be with us. There's no need for you to take up weapons because we're going to give you land. We're going to give you respect. You can speak your language. This approach to the world has the potential to unlock some of the conflicts that we work on. I wish that we had some thinking like that in Ukraine today. The last thing I want to say as I draw to a close is my hope, my absolute hope, is that young people are so extraordinary coming along behind of us. And one of my new principles is to try and to step back and to listen more carefully to the young people that are engaged in this work, but everywhere. The research at the moment says that young people don't work in a field. They don't work in peace or development or engineering. They have the sense that they belong in the world, and all of these things interact with one another. They see climate change and the environment as connected to peace and conflict. These are one for them. And their ideas and their energy, whether it's Joshua Wong staring down China in Hong Kong, whether it's Greta Thunberg in Sweden, the young people across Myanmar this year have made huge sacrifices, uncompromising, about the future they want, the imagined peace that they have inside of themselves. And so I feel extraordinarily optimistic despite the terrible things that we've seen in this last year and the last 10 years, but really hopeful that young people, if many of us can step away, can let go, to have the courage to say, we don't have the answers. We don't know what is the way forward, but that actually maybe they do, and that maybe we've shaped them in such ways that they can lead us all forward. Thank you so much for having me and giving me this space to share a whole lot of crazy ideas, grounded here in the village in Cambodia, but so happy always to be connected to Australia and being a part of the world together with all of Rotary, Imagine Peace. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emma. That was an amazing presentation, and I think we are truly honoured to have you here today as one of our guest speakers. You know, it should be noted, I think that over in Cambodia at the moment, it's a bit after 6 in the morning. So Emma was up bright and early with the birds I can hear in the background. So, you know, thank you very much for that. We very much appreciate your contribution to us here today. Ken will be giving a summary of Emma's presentation, but I just wanted to say, I think the point 5 of your 5-point list, I think really resonates with Rotary at this particular point in time. Courageousness, you know, are we innovative enough? You know, how can we find another way to do things? And, you know, the challenge from Rotary International President Jennifer Jones is to look at other ways that we can do things. It takes courage to let go of the ways we've always done things. So, yeah, have a look, be courageous. Jennifer wants us to but make changes where you want to have those changes done. But yeah, be courageous. So anyway, I hand over now to Shia, who will be curating the Q&A session. So thank you again, Emma. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. I will just say you're so right when you say we rarely see pictures of peace. It's just always about the suffering. It's never about the happiness and the joy that people have. So it's lovely to hear that you've actually got a peace museum about joyful things rather than suffering. So I've got a few questions. The first one is from Josh. Now it's a long one, so I apologise while I read it. They were reading the Ray Dalio's book about principles for the New World Order. And in this book, he talks about all empires go through cycles. China has gone through many cycles from the Ming and Qing dynasties to the current communist regime, also the decline of the Dutch and British empires previously. This has involved revolution, rebuilding, peace, prosperity, and then there is a period of excess inequality and the cycle starts again. We have an emerging world power in China and the current world power of the USA is potentially in decline. Are we seeing the stage for a significant altercation between these two powers, notwithstanding the Russian situation at the moment?
Thank you, Josh. Yeah, I mean, I think it's the burning question on everybody's lips as we watch what unfolds. I think it's important to continue to go back into the detail. And ironically, what's been courageous for us is to have to try and learn Chinese and publish in Chinese, precisely because what you're saying, yes, China is China is the biggest country in the world, 1.2 billion people, and yet extraordinarily stable. It has almost every community across the country has a health clinic, has a school, has electricity, and so on. So it's well worth reading Yuan An, who's a Singaporean academic who's written about how China came out of poverty and stabilized themselves after the Cultural Revolution. Yes, United States is most certainly in decline, depending on what we consider to be decline. Obviously, communities in conflict with each other, all kinds of issues coming up domestically that need to be addressed. So I don't want to say that we're in a new world order per se. I'd like to see that we think about the people as the new world order. Interestingly, because you've taken a political perspective there, we're reading a lot in Chinese that they're not happy at all about the way this is rolled out in Ukraine. There was an agreement between Premier Xi and Putin to say, after the Olympics, okay, you can go ahead with this, but keep it low key. Don't make it a big noise. And it's really upset and scared the Chinese a bit to see the world respond in the way that it has. And so in a way, that's a great thing because it shows that we can still influence, that China doesn't want the world to blow up. They're not interested in pressing the button and triggering a world war. They do want to quietly continue their effort to connect the planet, to use the resources they need to stabilize their population, to do economy and so on. So I think we have to move beyond the big narratives, you know, that China and the US, China and Russia, these three powers. It's also interesting to note that we're in the year of the tiger. And I have to say that's why I often wear red this year because they keep telling us we're supposed to wear red. It's coincidental, but they say that there are 3 tigers battling it out in the year of the tiger. So they suggest that we're all supposed to be fierce and continue on, but to prepare for more trouble. So what am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is let's move beyond the narrative. I think Rotary has the most extraordinary opportunity to reach out to your Rotary clubs in China, to get to know them better, to build the people-to-people movements in face of what we can see as political leadership everywhere that's less interested in the kind of values that Rotary and our organisation share. And I think that's fundamental. So thanks for asking that. I'll put the link to Yuan An's book in the chat.
Thank you. And the last question we had is from Trish asking, how do we help others to let go of their fear and to be courageous to make change?
I think if any of you are fans of Brené Brown, her thing is about being more vulnerable. And I think in conflict transformation, peace building work, we've understood that humility and real humility, like we don't know, but we're going to listen, actually alleviates fear. is if you're not all knowing and all powerful, then I don't have to be afraid that I don't know. Imposter syndrome, people's confidence, people feeling like everything is so big and overwhelming. And so where's my place in this? So in a way, sitting with people and being where they are and listening and accepting, absolute acceptance. We have lately called it radical hospitality, is how do you just embrace people and be generous to them where they are and accept them for who they are. And so many broken people in the world who are in the midst of terrible violence, and people make choices because of the lives that they've been born into. How can we accept them where they are and then help them move forward? And that's why I tell the story about my husband who went through absolute tragedy, became a soldier, but then realized this was not who he wanted to be, but needed help to move beyond that. And I think that's something we can all afford, anybody in our lives who is less than perfect. We're all less than perfect, but approaching through vulnerability and humility, I would say, is the way to unlock fear and anxiety and uncertainty in the world.
Thank you. Paul had started to write a question and just goes, how can we? So Paul, if you want to actually finish your sentence, I can ask Emma your question.
How can we?
Okay. Oh gosh. Okay. I'm going to read. Okay. So Josh has sent a question instead. Josh has said there is also the quote, the road to Auschwitz was built by hate, but paved with indifference. There needs to be a coalition of people to bring about change in a regime. It's very hard as a reformer has enemies in all the people who currently profit from the existing system. So how can people disrupt the malign system peacefully without using weapons of war? Oh, God, these are questions. I'm glad it's you and not me.
Josh and I need a whole conversation of our own. I mean, actually, this has been the unseen story of Myanmar in this last year, is within 2 months of the coup, the most extraordinary dialogue started between groups that ordinarily don't speak to each other. So different ethnic political parties, the National League for Democracy, Aung San Suu Kyi's people. And amazing that they did all of this online and on the run and in the jungle and so on. But they started a dialogue. And so absolutely fighting back, organizing, these things are what we're used to thinking about in terms of regimes. But what they effectively did was they gave birth to a new kind of future for the country right in the midst of the old reality. And I think that's something that will be interesting to see how it grows. It's as if it's expanding out and will push the violence, the military system, the economic systems to the edges. They've created a new counter economy. Obviously, sanctions on generals and holding people down is still important. It's the same for us in North Korea, is if we open North Korea just a little bit, actually we could see the potential for change. But what we've done is isolate North Korea to such an extent that the people now are so isolated, they only have one thing to listen to, and that's their leader. And so we're crazy to let people be alone. I have rung North Korea every 2 weeks since COVID because they've been even more isolated. And those calls so important for the people there. Tell us what's happening in the world. We heard something about Ukraine. What's going on there? How are your grandchildren, Emma? What's happening in Myanmar today? Because they don't have news and information. And those are things that we can talk about on the telephone. We can't talk about the situation in North Korea so much, but they give us some clues. But the point is, let's not isolate people in the midst of that stuff. Let's reach out to them more. But Josh, yeah, there's more political conversation there to be had.
And the last question is from Paul. How can Rotary clubs and Rotarians help influence peace?
I mean, you're already doing so much. I'm amazed at the people coming through university programs around the world. I think modeling the things that we're talking about, I think speaking to political leaders about values and what's important. I think practicing radical hospitality, and I think in Australia, just want to check you can, oh no, I'm not frozen. Radical hospitality in Australia is something that we need to mainstream. Australia is not isolated from the world. There is such a need. And I'm not just talking about refugees, it's about how we build our our values in our society that project out into the world. I think we're really getting so many of the issues coming from Canada, the truckers' strike, New Zealand, the US. Let's listen. Active listening is a fundamental. But equally, yeah, reach out to the Rotary clubs that are unexpected, that you wouldn't expect to normally partner with, meet, connect. But yeah, I say you're on it. And imagine Rotary. What is the radical new, not even radical, just what is the Rotary that's needed for the 21st century? And bring young people in, let them rip through the whole thing, because I think we'll be surprised how incredible they are. Compassionate, powerful, thoughtful, and serious, very serious young people.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much for your presentation today and for taking the time to answer our questions. I will now hand it over to Ken. Still, you're on mute, Ken. You haven't unmuted. Still not. It's not the freezing, it's the unmuting that we have issues with. Oh, there you go. All yours, Ken.
Why the simple things so difficult sometimes, so I apologise for that. Thank you, Emma. A very inspirational talk. And while a rocking granny may be very important, I think you were so much more than that. With the current atrocities in the Ukraine and the death of the 8 polio workers in Afghanistan, the quest for peace, I believe, can never be understated. We're fortunate to live in Australia, where we are somewhat protected from the wars and hardship faced by others, but we need to be more vigilant about helping them. We've heard your message today and now have a clear understanding of the plight of those you work with and those you support. I was interested to hear, the fact that you show up every day working with and for people that matter. Some of the words you mentioned that resonate with us all were listening, respect, diversity, equity, learning and courage, and letting go of the past and embracing the future. I'm certain that your words have had a very positive impact on us all. I'm proud that peace and conflict prevention is a Rotary area of focus, and I hope the Rotarians here today will look to develop new projects or support those already in play. We very much appreciate that you joined us today, and as David said earlier, you're 4 hours behind us, so you must have had a very, very early start indeed. The 6 district governors elected are hosting this event wish to make a donation to assist you to carry on your good work, and it's our pleasure to do so. I attempted to find a single word to describe you and the work you do. I stopped at awesome. I hope that this is an adequate summation, but we have been very privileged to hear you today, so thank you for inspiring us all.